What is potentially the strongest evidence right now against David, the 21-year-old man accused of murdering and dismembering 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez? Digital forensics, witnesses. I want to condense it, I want to explain it, and I also want to talk about what the defense may do. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. All right, real quick, look, I know we're all looking for ways to be smarter with our money in 2026, and most of us are earning next to nothing, just letting our money sit there in a regular savings account. But our sponsor, Chime, is built to actually reward your money. Why do I say that? With their Chime card, members can get 5% cash back on a category of their choice, like groceries, gas, bills, travel, dining out. How great does 5% back on weekly groceries sound, right? And with Chime's high yield savings account, you can earn 3.75% APY. That's 9 times higher than national average rates. They even help you be strategic with your extra cash. Like their Roundups feature, it deposits spare change on purchases right into your savings. So right now you can get a $75 bonus through my link. Head on over to chime.com/sidebar or scan the QR code on screen and start growing your money today. So one of the things I wanted to focus on that we didn't really get an opportunity to do, I think, in our prior episodes, is to really understand how strong is the evidence against David. Kind of gives us a preview of what a preliminary hearing will look like, now scheduled from later in the month. Again, that's where the prosecution will present sufficient evidence to have the case move forward towards trial. That's what they're hoped to do. They'll have a challenge from the defense, or even what we could expect from a trial. And when I talk about the evidence, maybe what's the most compelling evidence, right? Because we spent an episode really diving into the disturbing allegations that came out, but now I want to put my legal cap on for a minute. I want to talk about the allegations, the alleged evidence, how strong it may or may not be. So we're talking about 21-year-old David Anthony Burke, goes by David, months after 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez was found dead, mutilated, reportedly in David's Tesla at a Hollywood tow yard. Prosecutors have charged him, the singer-songwriter, with first-degree murder, continuous sexual abuse of a child under 14, and unlawful mutilation of human remains. He's entered a not guilty plea. It is important to remember that he's innocent until proven guilty. But let's talk about the potential evidence here. I want to start with the murder charge that's also connected to the mutilation charge. In fact, all the charges are very, very connected to one another, and the theory is connected to one another. So we go to the brief that was filed by the prosecution in anticipation of the preliminary hearing. It was first set for this week. It's now been delayed. But it says, quote, "Tellingly, defendant subsequently purchased tools to carry out his plot to dismember and dispose of the victim's body. On April 24th, 2025, remember they are saying that she was killed on April 23rd, 2025 at his house. On April 24th, 2025, defendant ordered a shovel from Home Depot that was delivered to his home from Postmates. On May 1st, 2025, defendant ordered and subsequently Amazon delivered 2 chainsaws to his home. On May 5th, 2025, defendant ordered and Amazon subsequently delivered a body bag, heavy-duty laundry bags, and a blue inflatable pool to his home. He made these purchases under the fake name Victoria Mendez. On May 8th, 2025, defendant returned to the same area in Santa Barbara County, leaving his home at around 11:30 p.m. He returned to the area again on May 31st, 2025. This is an isolated site off SR 154 where the victim's identification was subsequently discovered in January 2026. Additionally, on July 7th, 2025, defendant ordered and subsequently Amazon delivered a burn cage to his home under the same fake name as part of his plan to incinerate evidence. Moreover, defendant took horrifying measures to destroy and discard the victim's body. After placing her body into the blue inflatable pool to prevent her blood from spilling onto his garage floor, defendant used a chainsaw and perhaps other tools to cut off her limbs. Small blue plastic fragments were found embedded in the victim's remains, which were collected by the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Department. The fragments were analyzed by the LAPD's Forensic Science Division Trace Analysis Unit. An expert was able to match a physical fit match from the blue fragments to the blue inflatable pool purchased by defendant in May 2025. In order to distance himself from the victim, he amputated her left ring and pinky fingers because her ring finger contained a tattoo of his name. Her fingers have not been recovered. Defendant then placed her head and torso into the cadaver bag he purchased. He placed her limbs into a garbage bag, which he deposited into his front trunk, laying the cadaver bag on top. For several weeks or possibly months, defendant left the victim's body to decompose inside his Tesla. Okay, of course, there will be a battle of experts and questions of how the evidence was collected, what does it mean, how it was maintained, but potentially making the blue fragments match is huge. If you match the pool to him, you match the pool to Celeste, that's going to be critical. The alleged purchase history, this digital trail, some of the most potentially damning evidence out there. We have seen historically that has been hard for defense attorneys to argue away or explain away. I saw this idea that perhaps, maybe these materials were purchased for some sort of music video. That could be a tough sell, particularly you talk about the timing, right? The timing of when authorities say Celeste was killed, unless there's going to be a dispute, not only about cause of death by the defense, but also time of death. Why would you allegedly purchase those things? And if the order and delivery records confirm this, that's huge for the prosecution's case. The list of potential evidence in this brief says, quote, DNA evidence developed from blood stains collected from defendant's garage which match the victim's genetic profile. Proof of defendant's Amazon purchases and deliveries to his residence, including 2 chainsaws, a body bag, an inflatable pool, heavy-duty laundry bags, and a burn cage after April 24th, 2025. Again, the records, maybe you even have the delivery person testify. Private investigator Steve Fisher, who's been on this case from the very beginning, shared photos of some of those alleged packages. You can see the deliveries are addressed to Victoria Mendez, or appear to be. It's unclear why David would use that particular name, but, quote, proof of defendant's purchase and delivery from Postmates of a shovel from Home Depot to his home on April 24th, 2025. It's not just one item, right? It's a collection of these very specific items that is, again, my opinion, not great for the defense. But again, we're still in the early stages of this. Uber records showing defendant's transaction where he ordered an Uber to pick up the victim from her Lake Elsinore home and transport her to his residence the night of April 23rd, 2025. And when LAPD served a search warrant at the home that David was renting or staying at after Celeste was identified, they reportedly found all sorts of evidence in the garage to support this claim, this argument of dismemberment, including biological evidence that tested positive for blood. They say they were able, again, to match the evidence to the victim's unique genetic profile. I mentioned that before. Talking about the pool again, this reportedly had multiple linear cuts. And on top of all that, according to the prosecution's brief, surveillance video and other evidence confirmed defendant was the last person to drive the vehicle on July 29, 2025, before he left Los Angeles on a concert tour. And remember, her body was discovered about a little over a month later. And the filing states that David lied to friends, business associates, and others about the strong smell of decay in and around the home and the car. So it could be very difficult for defense attorneys to say, he was completely in the dark, he's being framed, he had no idea what was happening, what was going on. Although, is it possible someone else maybe had access to the car afterwards? Possibly, but does that negate his alleged knowledge of what was going on? So it goes to the idea of who may be a cooperating witness as well, right? What did they observe about the car? What did they smell? What did they ask David? So this all makes me wonder in terms of a defense. I wonder if defense attorneys could get to the point and say, look, yeah, he bought all this stuff. Yep, we're going to acknowledge that. He purchased all this stuff after prosecutors claim she died, right? They might not say she was killed, that she died. So maybe they may make the argument he wasn't responsible for her death. Maybe she died in another way, and then in a panic, he was just part of the disposal, or he helped with the disposal. I don't know if they're going to say perhaps someone else is responsible for her death. I've seen cases like this before. Out in Florida, the James Scandarito case, found not guilty of murdering his father, but guilty in connection with the dismemberment. Took the stand, told this really wild story, but the jury believed it. So in other words, will we ever really know what happened to Celeste or not? Because according to the autopsy report that was released, Celeste's official cause of death was multiple penetrating injuries. The manner of death was homicide, but perhaps defense attorneys will argue against that. Battle of the experts, say her body was too decomposed to really know what happened, to really know how she died. And then we get to this. So investigators contend that April 23rd was when Celeste was allegedly killed by David, soon after arriving at the house in the Hollywood Hills. How do they know that? How do they establish that time frame? From the court filing by the prosecution, it says, quote, at approximately 8:40 p.m. on April 23, 2025, defendant sent an Uber to transport the victim from her Lake Elsinore home to his residence. Again, the digital records will be key here. You don't always have that in other cases. They communicated before and during her Uber ride, which dropped her off at defendant's Hollywood Hills home around 10:10 p.m. Okay, so again, the digital records, the text messages, the potential testimony of this driver. At approximately 10:30 p.m., defendant sent text messages to the victim inquiring where she was. So it might be hard for the defense to say that message wasn't sent, the time frame. So you're looking at this 20 minutes, what happened? Prosecution says the people contend this was part of defendant's premeditated plan to cover up the murder, as she was already dead by this time. It's a good point, right? I mean, like, why would he text her or allegedly text her if she was at the house? I mean, is this house so big he didn't know where she was? I don't know. Or does it go to this narrative that, you know, he's trying to cover up the tracks and trying to say something happened to her? Quote, knowing he had to silence the victim before she ruined his music career, as she had threatened very soon after her arrival at his home, defendant stabbed the victim to death multiple times and stood by while she bled out. Now, I will tell you, I don't know what evidence they have to definitively establish what happened behind closed doors. This is their narrative. This is their theory. And by the way, I will get into a little bit more about the special circumstances allegations, that this is not just a murder, according to prosecutors, but a very specific kind of murder, the motive behind it. Quote, at no time did he call law enforcement or 911 or take her to an emergency room to attempt to save her life. And that's important because they'll say that this wasn't a case like, you know, they got into a fight, she attacked him, he panicked, you know, killed her as a result of self-defense, called 911. They're ruling that out. Quote, despite knowing she was dead and her family was trying to find her, the evidence will show defendant lied and claimed he didn't know where she was. In fact, defendant drove to Santa Barbara County immediately after the victim died, attempting to dispose of her property and destroy evidence. At approximately 11:30 p.m. on April 23, 2025, he drove away from his home as he texted and called the victim's phone, asking where she was. Again, these were acts calculated and planned to set up his defense within a very short timeline after the victim's vicious murder. Defendant drove his Tesla north on the 101 freeway to San Marcos Pass Road, SR 154, near Lake Cachuma in Santa Barbara County. Now I'm wondering if there are potentially cameras capturing this movement. He returned home early the following morning on April 24, 2025, before going to a radio interview for the release of his album that week. He sent 2 additional texts to the victim's phone that day, which obviously went unanswered because she was already dead. I'm going to talk about interviews in a little bit, by the way. After April 26, 2025, defendant never attempted to contact her again. That's important. That's important. If the phone records establish he didn't text her or call her and he's completely innocent, that would be surprising, right? Somebody, at the very least, you know, that he knows, has a connection with. She disappears, he's not going to try to contact her. Again, this is the prosecution's narrative. We'll see what the defense says, but another piece of evidence. Quote, defendant's cellular activity and communications derived from defendant's iPhone and Tesla, which demonstrate defendant's activities from April 22, 2025 through April 24, 2025, including a trip to Santa Barbara County in the middle of the night after the victim arrived at his Hollywood Hills home. Evidence, evidence. So that's the key here, that why prosecutors are going with lying in wait, silencing a witness, the special circumstances allegations to enhance the potential penalties for the murder charge, that David planned this, that it wasn't like they were arguing and something happened or she had an overdose and he panicked. They're making the argument that this was planned, this was premeditated, that he allegedly wanted her dead to keep her quiet about their alleged secret relationship, that she was a minor, prevent her from exposing this, ruining his career. Now things like the cell phone records, the rideshare records, the digital data will be crucial, which is why it's not surprising when Steve Fisher, the PI, says there are over 50 search warrants in this case. That's the kind of evidence in 2026 that tells so much of the story and can be very difficult for a defense attorney to refute. Placing time, location. Now, on the other hand, I don't believe authorities have the alleged murder weapon. I don't believe there's an eyewitness to this alleged attack. I don't believe there's surveillance footage showing this alleged attack as far as we know. So is that room for reasonable doubt? And one way prosecutors are going to tell this story and try to prove those special circumstances allegations surrounding the alleged murder will also be evidence of the alleged illegal sexual relationship, sexual relations with a minor. Digital plus timing. What do I mean? From the evidence list, again in the brief, it says the description of photographs depicting the victim naked, as well as while she was engaged with defendant in sexual activity when she was 13. As this evidence constitutes child sexual abuse material, the photographs themselves will not be presented. While all possible charges that could be proven were not filed, the CSAM is proof of their ongoing sexual relationship while the victim was 13 and 14 years old. So if this material is on his devices, again, quote, numerous text messages between defendant and the victim evidencing their sexual relationship, pregnancy, abortion, and use of Plan B emergency contraception. Messages through March 2025 prove defendant continued to manipulate the victim as she messaged, all we do is have sex and just hang out. Man, I want more than that for myself. These messages were obtained from defendant's iCloud data. So again, the digital data could help prove the sex charge. And we reported this yesterday on Sidebar, but the death certificate has been updated. This is per reporting from TMZ to suggest that it is unknown if Celeste was pregnant, even though there was nothing in the actual autopsy report, as far as we could tell, to suggest that she was. So it is a little confusing here. I spoke to Joseph Scott Morgan on my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, last night. He said they may have to just do that because of the investigative findings of the messages about pregnancy and, Plan B and abortion, and because Celeste was dismembered and decomposed, it can ultimately be difficult to 100% rule out that she was pregnant. So it's not necessarily saying that she was, but how do we know for sure? It's unknown. Although I will say, if prosecutors believe for sure that Celeste was pregnant or had evidence to establish that she was pregnant, they would have mentioned that, right? That would have gone to motive. That would have gone to the special circumstances allegations. Taking their narrative that David killed her to keep her quiet about the relationship being exposed, what's better proof of this alleged sexual relationship with a minor if they could show she was pregnant with his baby, right? They would have presented that. They didn't. So I don't know how much that's going to be a factor or not, but at the very least, digital evidence allegedly establishing the relationship and the narrative. Oh, and by the way, this came out yesterday. I think this might be evidence because of what I just mentioned before. It wasn't made specifically about the prosecution's filings, but I do wonder if this is going to be part of the case because according to reporting from the New York Post, April 24th, so the day after he allegedly murdered Celeste, he does an interview on the Zach Sang show, and he was reportedly very casual, smiling, making jokes, but allegedly said this, quote, like in the process of, getting outside my house and exploring the world and finding friends, losing friends, finding relationships, losing relationships, it's just everything has kind of been shaping and leading up to this project in such a domino effect way. And when it came to writing songs about failed relationships, he said, I'm always expecting it to happen, and then after, as soon as it happens, I'm writing about it. And the host asked, but you saying expecting it to end in a devastating, tragic, sad way so it can inspire art, but are you manifesting that in a certain way? David responded, I don't know. I hope I'm not. I really hope I'm not because it feels that way. So I hope I'm not involuntarily doing that, but it might be that way. And by the way, we may also get a glimpse of what else this trial will include. I say that because evidence from a prior investigation into David and Celeste may be a part of this trial. Because the filing from prosecutors claims that LAPD robbery homicide detectives determined Celeste and David met in January of 2022 when she was just 11 years old and allegedly began that sexual relationship with Celeste when she was just 13 and David was 18. And the court paperwork revealed that investigators have been looking into David for quite some time. The filing says detectives learned the victim had been reported missing to the Riverside County Sheriff's Department by her family who live in Lake Elsinore in February and April 2024. RCSD telephonically contacted defendant on February 17, 2024 after they identified a phone number in the victim's phone records that belonged to him. During the call, defendant claimed he had spoken to the victim last on February 13th or 14th, 2024, but stated he was unaware she was a minor or that she had been reported missing. RCSD advised him that Los Angeles Sheriff's Department deputies would be coming to his home. On that day, defendant was living at 804 North Doheny Place in West Hollywood. RCSD requested that LASD conduct a welfare check at defendant's home. LASD deputies went to defendant's home that night at 8:15 p.m. and informed him the victim was a 13-year-old runaway. Defendant again claimed he was unaware she was a minor and he had only met the victim once in person in November of 2023. However, defendant showed deputies a yearbook photo of the victim he had on his cell phone. Although he claimed to be unaware of where the victim was at the time, she returned home 2 days later. Despite being informed by law enforcement the victim was only 13, defendant continued to pursue her. After the victim returned home in February 2024, her parents took her cell phone away. Defendant drove to Lake Elsinore and paid a junior high school student in the victim's class $1,000 to give the victim a cell phone defendant purchased so they could stay in contact. Throughout 2024, the victim spent a significant amount of time with defendant, including summer weekends at his home in the Hollywood Hills and traveling with him to Las Vegas, London, and Texas to meet his family. And I mentioned timing. So when Celeste reportedly died, so two parts to this. Evidence of this alleged relationship, which again goes into the sex crime charge, which goes into the special circumstances allegations, but timing. Timing. When Celeste reportedly died, yes, David was at the height of his career. Per prosecutors, April 23rd, 2025 is the likely date of the victim's death and when all her cellular activity ceased. The night prior, April 22nd, 2025, defendant and the victim engaged in a lengthy argument described in detail in their text messages. The messages revealed the victim's jealousy over defendant's relationships with other women as defendant led her to believe they had a future together. She became extremely upset and threatened to disclose damaging information about her relationship with defendant to end his career and destroy his life. We don't know those exact messages, but taking the prosecution's narrative, defendant's first studio album was due to be released on April 25, 2025. He had an emerging multi-million-dollar career already in progress. He also had multiple product endorsements, which were highly profitable. So yes, when Celeste died, there was the tour, sponsorships, interviews, album release. He allegedly had a party on April 24th, the day after Celeste reportedly died. So prosecutors will definitely try to establish how he was flying high and couldn't let anything jeopardize that she was going to come out, expose him, and killed her as a witness. We told you in an episode yesterday that after David was arrested, the video game Fortnite announced it was going to refund players who made David-related purchases in his game. His label ultimately dropped him. So I wonder if that's going to be the evidence that prosecutors will use to say, look what happened. This was what he was trying to avoid. Quote, proof of defendant's lucrative career. As a singer and songwriter prior to April 23rd, 2025, defendant had an album release party on the night of April 24th, 2025, before embarking on an international tour in late July 2025. Text message exchanges between defendant and the victim on April 22nd and April 23rd, 2025, where the victim threatened to expose defendant and destroy his career. Again, all important potential compelling evidence. Got to call this one out too. It was reported that David's brother, Caleb, posted on Instagram, and this was reported by the account, the Shade Room, all pedophiles and rapists should die, ending with period. Now, this is an expired story, not entirely clear what this alleged post was about. Didn't mention David, but considering there was these reports about an effort by prosecutors to have David's family be subpoenaed and have to provide testimony in this case, interesting to say the least. Now, this is the beginning stages. I am very curious to see what comes out at this preliminary hearing, again, scheduled for the end of the month. That's where we'll learn more about the specifics of the evidence, maybe about cooperating witnesses, but this is kind of a sample of what prosecutors claim they have against David. We'll see where it goes. That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also check us out on NBC's Peacock as well. If you want to follow me, X, Instagram, my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. Eastern. See you next time, everybody.